My name is Lena Marsh. I am 35 years old. And the night my mother stood in front of a local television crew at her own retirement party and introduced me to a room full of colleagues as her difficult daughter, she did not know that the woman standing 3 feet behind her was the documentary programming director of the Sundance Film Festival. My mother had spent 26 years on camera. She knew exactly how every word landed. She used the word difficult, the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. Precise. Deliberate. Designed to cut cleanly and leave no visible mark. What she did not know was that someone in that room was already watching. Not her. Me. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm glad you are here. If you have ever been the one your family could not figure out how to explain, the one they described with a shrug and a half smile at gatherings, the one who was always a little too much or not quite enough, this story is going to feel familiar. Drop a comment below with one word, the label your family gave you. I read every single one. And if you are new here, subscribe now, because what happens in the next hour took 35 years to build. And the moment it lands, you will want to have been here from the beginning. Let me take you back to the beginning. My mother's name is Carol Marsh, Carol Diane Marsh. She was for 26 years the evening news anchor for a regional television station in Central Virginia. 5 nights a week, she sat behind a desk in a blazer that matched the station's brand colors and delivered the news with a composure so practiced, it had become indistinguishable from warmth. People in our town trusted her. They recognized her at the grocery store. They called her by her first name. They felt, without ever having met her, that they knew her. I grew up understanding the difference between the woman on the screen and the woman who came home at 11:15, hung up her blazer, and ran the household like a production meeting that was already behind schedule. My sister Bree understood the difference too. But Bree had made peace with it. Bree was 2 years younger than me, camera-ready in the way that daughters of television anchors sometimes are. The right smile at the right moment, the right posture in the right chair. My mother enrolled Bree in a broadcast journalism program at 18. She arranged the connection, she made the call. She knew who to contact and what to say, because she had spent 26 years learning exactly that. My father, Thomas Marsh, was a high school history teacher for 32 years. He taught in the same county where he was born, in the same building where he had once been a student himself. He was not a man who filled rooms. He was a man who filled margins, the kind of person who wrote small notes in the borders of everything he was reading, who remembered the middle names of his students' parents, who drove 4 hours without telling anyone and sat in the back of a church basement so he could watch his daughter's first documentary screening. I did not know he was there until years later. I will come back to that. My family had a system. It was not written down anywhere. No one ever sat at a table and agreed to it. It simply existed, the way the furniture existed, the way the arrangement of photographs on the living room wall existed. It was just the way things were. Carol was the center, Bree was the extension of Carol. My father was the quiet edge that held the frame together, and I was the one the system did not have a category for. They found a word. Difficult. I was 7 the first time I heard it applied to me as a verdict. My mother's station was doing a community outreach event. A school visit. My class was in the 3rd row. My mother sat behind a news desk they had brought in from the studio, a portable version, the same gray laminate, the same silver logo, set up in the gymnasium under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly unwell. She was answering questions from students. Scripted questions mostly. What is your favorite part of the job? How do you stay calm on camera? What advice do you have for young journalists? Then she pointed to me. She did not know she was pointing to me. In the gymnasium lights, I was just a hand in the 3rd row. I asked, "Do you actually believe everything you say, or are you just reading it?" The room went quiet. The way rooms go quiet when a child has said something that the adults recognize but cannot address in public. My teacher laughed nervously. 2 station employees exchanged a look. My mother smiled, the smile she used when something surprised her on air. The controlled recovery smile, the one that looked like warmth and functioned like a wall. She said, "Good question," and moved on to the next raised hand. That evening at home, I heard her say it to my father in the kitchen, in the voice she reserved for conversations she assumed I could not hear. "That child is going to be difficult." Not is difficult. Going to be. Like she was reading the weather. Like the forecast was already fixed, and the only question was how bad it would get. I was 7 years old, and my mother, who read the news for a living, had just delivered the headline on my life. I did not know then what I would build from that word. But I built something. The label settled in fast. That is what labels do. They do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with an argument you can counter. They seep in through the cracks of ordinary moments. The offhand comment at the dinner table. The slight pause before your name is mentioned. The way a room rearranges itself around you without anyone admitting that is what is happening. By the time I was 9, difficult was structural. It held up the ceiling of every conversation my mother had about me. She said it to her sister on the phone, walking the kitchen in slow circles, pulling the cord taut. "Lena is just," she sighed, the specific sigh of a woman performing patience, "difficult." She said it to the pediatrician when I asked why my physical hurt and whether the instruments were sterilized. "She is very curious," the doctor said carefully. "She is very difficult," my mother corrected, in the same tone she used to correct mispronounced names on air. Curiosity was not on the approved list. In our house, curiosity was the first cousin of insubordination. Bree never asked questions that slowed things down. Bree had inherited my mother's instinct for the room. She could feel the temperature of a conversation and adjust herself to it within seconds. She smiled at the right moments. She said the right amount. She understood that the performance of a family is just as deliberate as the performance of a news broadcast, and she had studied the format with the quiet diligence of someone who intended to work in the industry. I did not understand the format, or I understood it too well and refused to perform it. I was never entirely sure which one was true. My father taught history because he believed that the record mattered, that the documented version of events had weight, that you could not understand where you were going if you refused to look honestly at where you had been. He said this to his students. He said it quietly at home, occasionally in the margins of louder conversations. My mother believed in the curated version, the version you shaped before it reached the audience, the version that served the story you had decided to tell. They were not unhappy together exactly. They had built a life that worked. My father graded papers at the kitchen table. My mother reviewed her scripts in the living room. They attended each other's events. They presented well as a unit. Whatever frictions existed between their two very different ideas about truth, they kept those frictions behind a door that neither of them ever fully opened. I was the thing that kept rattling the door. By the time I was 12, I had discovered the library. Not the school library, with its laminated covers and approved reading lists. The public library 3 blocks from our house, a brick building from the 1950s that smelled like paper and central heating. I went there after school and read until my father picked me up on his way home from the school where he taught. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Billy, Aldrich, who wore bifocals on a beaded chain, handed me a documentary film catalog one afternoon when she saw me lingering in the nonfiction section. "These are films," she said, "real ones, about real people." She said it the way you say something to a child you have recognized before they have recognized themselves. I took the catalog home. I read it cover to cover. I wrote down every title in a spiral notebook. That was the beginning. At 14, I borrowed my father's camcorder, a heavy rectangular thing that took cassette tapes and had a viewfinder you held against your eye like a telescope. I started filming the neighborhood. Not events, not performances, just things that were already happening without an audience. Mrs. Pellegrino on the corner, watering her roses at 6 in the morning. The crossing guard at the elementary school who sang to himself between crossings. The empty parking lot behind the grocery store where teenagers met on Friday nights and never did anything more alarming than talk. My mother watched 3 minutes of one of these tapes and said, "What is the point of this, Lena?" I said, "I am documenting what is actually there." She turned the television back on. My father watched the full tape the following Saturday while my mother was at the station. He watched it on the small TV in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and his reading glasses on, even though there was nothing to read. When it was over, he rewound it and watched it again. Then he said only, "You see things other people walk past." 6 words. Delivered without drama. They stayed. I graduated high school with a grade point average my mother did not mention at dinner, and a film I had made about the closing of a textile mill in our county that screened once at a local community event in a room with folding chairs and bad acoustics. 40 people attended. One of them was a professor from the State University's journalism program who handed me a card afterward and said, "Apply. Full scholarship consideration. She will want to meet you." My mother's response when I told her, delivered without looking up from the papers she was reviewing, was this: "A film program." She turned a page. "You are going to film school." Not a question. A recalibration. The sound of someone updating the label. Difficult had just acquired a new subcategory. Artistic. Which, in Carol Marsh's vocabulary, was the polite word for impractical. The word you used for people who had chosen a direction that inconvenienced everyone else's understanding of success. I left for school in August. My mother did not drive me. My father did not drive me. My father did. He loaded my 2 bags into the trunk of his sedan, drove 4 hours through rain, carried my equipment case to the 3rd floor of the dormitory himself, stood in the doorway of my new room, and said one sentence: "Keep the camera on until people tell the truth." Then he drove home. I taped the words to the inside cover of my notebook that same night. I have rewritten them in every notebook I have used since. They are the closest thing I have to a thesis statement. They are also the closest thing I have to a manifesto. And they are the reason that, 17 years later, a woman named Marlene Chu drove to a hotel ballroom in Central Virginia to sit across from me and tell me that my film was the most important thing her festival had programmed in 4 years. But I am getting ahead of myself. Film school did not fix anything. I want to be honest about that. There is a version of this story where I leave home, arrive at a university, and the distance rewrites the damage. Where I find my people and build my confidence and stop hearing my mother's voice in the quiet moments before sleep. That version is cleaner. It is also not true. What film school gave me was vocabulary. A way to name what I had always been doing with the camera. A community of people who understood that paying attention was not a personality flaw. A library of films made by people who had pointed their cameras at the uncomfortable and refused to look away. What it did not give me was a family that updated its understanding of who I was. That gap between who I was becoming and who my family had decided I was widened with every year I was away. Not because I changed so dramatically. Because I stopped performing the version of myself they were comfortable with. And without the performance, they simply kept running the original recording. Difficult. Artistic. Too much. Not enough. My first year home for Christmas, my mother had framed new photos in the living room. Bree's college orientation. Bree at a campus event, smiling into the camera with the practiced ease of someone who had grown up watching a professional do it. Bree and my mother at a journalism luncheon, matching blazers, heads tilted toward each other. 7 new frames. I counted because counting was how I kept track of things that no one else was measuring. My mother had not asked for a single photograph from my first year of school. Not of my dormitory. Not of my first short film screening, a 12-minute piece about a Vietnamese restaurant owner in the university district that had been shown to 200 people and received a standing ovation from a woman in the front row who had never met me and yet cried through the final 4 minutes. Not one photograph. At Christmas dinner that year, I mentioned the screening. My father looked up from his plate with quiet attention, the way he always looked up when I spoke. My mother reached across the table to refill Bree's water glass and said, "Is the food at your school decent?" That was the response. A question about cafeteria food. I learned to stop mentioning things. This is the adaptation that happens when a family makes clear, year after year, that your accomplishments do not register on their frequency. You stop transmitting. Not out of pride, out of exhaustion. You cannot keep describing a color to people who have decided they cannot see it. By my mid-20s, I had made 3 short films and 1 feature-length documentary. The feature, a film called 60 Days, followed 3 women navigating the process of leaving domestic violence situations in rural counties with no shelters within 30 miles. It took me 2 years to make. I drove 80,000 miles across 4 states. I slept in my car 11 times because I could not afford the motels and would not leave the women I was filming in situations where they felt abandoned by someone who had promised to stay. The film screened at 17 festivals across 8 states. It was used in a training program for county social workers in 3 states. A senator from West Virginia referenced it by name during a floor speech about rural shelter funding. I was 27 years old, and a United States senator had said my name on the floor of Congress. My mother did not know. I had stopped telling her things by then. At Thanksgiving that year, she described my career to her sister over the phone, in the kitchen, while I was sitting at the table close enough to hear every word through the pass-through window. "Lena does her little films," she said. "You know how she is. Very independent. Very independent. The latest evolution of difficult. The version you use when someone is too old to be controlled and too established to be dismissed outright. So you sand the word down until it sounds almost like a compliment and use it to pat them on the head from a safe distance." I sat at that kitchen table and I did not correct her. I did not walk to the pass-through and say, "Mom, a senator said my name in Congress last Tuesday." I said nothing. I ate the rest of my sweet potato and drove 4 hours home in the dark. The following spring, I found something. I was visiting my parents for my father's birthday. My mother was at the station. I was in the living room looking for a book my father thought he had left on the shelf. Instead, I found a filing cabinet in the corner of his study that I had never noticed before. Old, green, 2 drawers, the kind of cabinet that appears in offices and never gets explained. The top drawer was locked, the bottom drawer was not. Inside, in the back, behind a row of hanging folders, labeled with school years and tax documents, was a manila folder held shut with a rubber band. Thick. Stuffed. I pulled it out. Inside were articles, printed on regular computer paper, some slightly smudged from an ink cartridge running low. Reviews of my films from small publications I had never thought to share with my family. A photograph from the 60-day screening in Pittsburgh, printed in grayscale, blurry at the edges, the kind of image quality that comes from zooming in on a web page and printing what you find. A letter from a film festival director in Ohio, formal, printed on letterhead, praising the film's craft. My father had found all of it himself. He had sat at his slow desktop computer and searched my name. He had typed it into a search bar character by character, probably hunting slowly with 2 fingers the way he always typed, and he had found my work scattered across the internet on film blogs and local newspapers and festival websites. And he had printed every piece he could find and put it in a folder and kept it in the bottom drawer behind the tax documents where my mother would not see it. I stood in his study and held the folder. I could hear him in the kitchen, the sound of him moving around, running water, the refrigerator opening and closing. I put the folder back exactly as I found it. I did not tell him I had seen it. Not then. That would come later. In a parking lot. After everything. But standing in his study that afternoon, holding the printed record of a career my mother had never acknowledged, I understood something that I had only partially understood before. My father knew. He had always known. He had just never found a way to say it where it would be heard. And so he did what careful men do when they love someone in a house that will not make room for that love out loud. He kept the receipts. He kept every single one. My mother's retirement was announced on a Tuesday in March. 26 years behind the desk, the station posted a tribute video on their website. Colleagues left comments. Viewers wrote letters. The local paper ran a half-page feature with a photograph of my mother at the anchor desk, chin slightly lifted, the composed expression she had worn on camera for a quarter-century. The comments section called her a treasure, an institution, the voice of the community. I read the article at my desk in Richmond, where I had been living for 3 years, 90 minutes from my parents' house, close enough to drive for emergencies, far enough to breathe. I felt, reading it, the thing I always felt when my mother was publicly celebrated. A complicated quiet. Not resentment. Not bitterness. Something more like the feeling you get standing outside a lit window at night, watching people inside a room you were never invited into, understanding that the warmth you can see through the glass was never meant to reach you. I texted her. "Congratulations, Mom. Well deserved," she replied 4 hours later. "Thank you, honey. The party is June 14th. You should come." You should come. Not please come. Not we want you there. You should come the way you tell someone they should really try the soup. A mild suggestion with no stakes attached. An invitation so casual it was almost not one. I said I would be there. I rearranged 3 days of editing. I confirmed with Marlene Chu, who had been in conversation with me for 6 weeks, about the Sundance selection for my new film, that I would be briefly unreachable over that weekend. I booked a room at a motel 12 miles from my parents' house because staying under their roof required a version of myself I no longer had the energy to perform. I drove to the party on a Saturday evening in June, windows down, the warm, thick air of a Virginia summer filling the car. The hotel ballroom was the kind of room designed for exactly this occasion. Round tables with white linen, a podium near the front with the station's logo on a foam core board, a screen set up for the tribute video, a bar along the far wall where colleagues from the station stood in clusters, name tags on lanyards, the comfortable ease of people who had worked beside each other for years. 120 people. My mother in the center of every orbit. She was wearing a dress the color of deep water, and a strand of pearls my father had given her on their 20th anniversary. She moved through the room the way she moved through everything. Measured, controlled, radiating a warmth that she distributed in precise portions. She hugged me when I arrived. The hug lasted exactly as long as a hug is supposed to last, and stopped before it became anything more. "You came," she said. "You look thin. Are you eating?" "I am eating, Mom." "You look beautiful." She touched her pearls. She was already looking past me. Diane from the morning segment had just walked in. I found my father near the window. He was sitting slightly apart from the main clusters of people, a glass of water in his hand, watching the room the way he always watched rooms, from the edge, taking in the full frame. He stood when he saw me. We hugged the way the two of us had always hugged, fully, without a clock running. "How are you holding up?" I said. He tilted his head at the room. "Your mother is happy." That was his answer. Not "I am fine." Not "it is a good night." "Your mother is happy." That was his answer. Not "I am fine." Not "it is a good night." "Your mother is happy." The most honest and most careful thing he could say in 6 syllables. I sat with him through the early part of the evening. We talked about his garden. A row of tomatoes that was coming in well. A problem with the fence on the east side of the yard. Ordinary things, the language of people who have learned to reach each other through the practical and the concrete. The tribute video played at 7 o'clock. 15 minutes of colleagues speaking warmly about my mother. Her precision, her composure, her decades of service. Bree appeared in the video, seated in a chair with good lighting, and said her mother had taught her that credibility was built one broadcast at a time. I was not in the video. I had not been asked. I noted it, filed it, kept my expression level. After the video, the station's news director gave a speech. Then the mayor, then a colleague who had anchored alongside my mother for 11 years and cried twice, genuinely, while speaking. Then the floor opened. The station had sent a small crew. One camera operator, one correspondent, a woman in her 30s named Jessica, who I recognized from the weekend broadcasts. They were circulating the room collecting quotes for a tribute segment that would air on the evening news the following Monday. Jessica found me near the dessert table. She had her microphone out. Small, handheld. The camera operator was 2 steps behind her. She introduced herself. Asked if I was family. I am Carol operator was 2 steps behind her. She introduced herself. Asked if I was family. I am Carol's daughter. Lena, her face brightened. Oh, wonderful. Would you like to say something for the segment? About your mother's career? I looked at the camera. The small red light was on. I said, she is very good at what she does. Jessica smiled, pen ready. And are you proud of her? I chose each word carefully. I think she did the best she could with the opportunities she was given. A half-beat of silence. Jessica wrote something on her notepad. My mother appeared at my shoulder. She had the instinct of someone who had spent 26 years monitoring the room for anything that was happening without her direction. She had seen the microphone. She had heard the question. She had heard my answer. She put her hand briefly on my arm. The performance of closeness. She said, Lena has always been the complicated one in our family, delivered with a laugh. Fond, exasperated. The laugh of a mother describing a beloved quirk. She said, very artistic. Then she turned to Jessica with her full anchor smile and said something about the years her colleagues had given her. And Jessica turned with the microphone, and the camera followed, and I was standing 3 inches outside the frame, before I had fully registered what had just happened. Complicated. Artistic. The labels had evolved with the decades, but the function was identical. On camera. In front of 120 people. At a party where my name was not in the tribute video and my seat was at a table near the kitchen, and my invitation had been a casual suggestion rather than a request. She had done it on camera. The red light was still on. I want to stop here for one moment. Because what I just described, standing outside the frame at your own mother's event, hearing yourself reduced to a word while a camera records it, is something I think a lot of you understand. Not the specific details, but the specific feeling. The feeling of being edited out in real time, right in front of your own eyes. If you have ever been in a room where someone who was supposed to protect you handed you a label instead, drop the word frame in the comments. I read every one of them. And stay with me, because what happens in the next 35 minutes is what 35 years of patience looks like when it finally has somewhere to land. Let me tell you about the film. Not the way a filmmaker describes their work, not with the language of craft and intention and artistic vision. The way you describe something that cost you everything you had and gave back more than you knew how to hold. The film was called Still Here. It took 2 years and 4 months to make. It began with a single phone call from a public defender in rural Kentucky named Marcus Webb, who had read about my previous work in a legal advocacy newsletter and tracked down my email address and written 3 sentences that stopped me mid-scroll. I have clients sitting in county jail right now who have never been convicted of anything. They cannot afford bail. Some of them have been there for 8 months. Nobody's making this film. I called him back the same day. What I found when I arrived in that county was this. Women, most of them mothers, held in a facility that smelled like industrial cleaner and something beneath it that industrial cleaner could not reach, waiting for court dates that kept being rescheduled, losing jobs they could not get back, losing apartments they could not hold, losing the thread of their children's daily lives from behind a glass partition on visiting days. The average bail amount for the women in my film was $500. $500 standing between a human being and her life. I filmed for 14 months. I drove back and forth across 3 states. I sat in visiting rooms and courtrooms and parking lots outside county buildings. I filmed a woman named Arlene on the day she was released after 247 days for a charge that was eventually dropped entirely. I filmed her standing in the parking lot of the facility in the clothes she had been wearing when she was brought in, holding a paper bag with her belongings, squinting into a light she had not stood in for 8 months. I filmed her calling her daughter. I held the camera steady. That is the whole job sometimes. Holding the camera steady while someone lives something real. Still, here premiered at a regional festival in the fall. It then moved through a circuit of documentary festival in the fall. It then moved through a circuit of documentary festivals, gathering attention the way a true story gathers attention. Slowly at first, then faster, then all at once. A prominent film critic wrote a piece about it that was shared 40,000 times in 48 hours. A civil rights organization screened it for their entire staff and sent me a letter on their letterhead, signed by their executive director. And then Marlene Chu emailed me. Marlene Chu had been the documentary programming director at a major film festival for 11 years. She had seen more documentaries than most people see films in a lifetime. She had a reputation for being direct in the way that only people who have no time left for performance are direct. Her first email to me was 4 sentences. I watched Still Here last night. I watched it again this morning. I want to talk to you about our programming. Are you available this week? We spoke for an hour and 40 minutes. She told me the film had been selected for the festival's documentary program. Then she told me it had been selected for the opening night slot. Then she told me it had been selected for the opening night slot. Then she told me a major streaming platform had already been in contact about acquisition. I was sitting at my desk in Richmond when she told me this. I looked at the wall above my desk, where I had pinned a photograph of Darlene standing in that parking lot, squinting into the light. I said, "I need a minute." Marlene said, "Take your time." I took 3 minutes. Then I came back and we discussed logistics. In the 6 weeks between that call and my mother's retirement party, I told no one in my family. Not because I was planning a reveal. Not because I was engineering a moment. Because in 35 years, no one in my family had created a habit of asking about my work, and I had stopped volunteering information into a silence that swallowed it whole. Bree did not ask. My mother did not ask. My father, who would have listened, I did not want to tell over the phone. Something that large deserved to be said in person, where I could see his face. There was something else I had not told anyone. In the 2 weeks before the party, I had received a formal offer. A letter and festival letterhead, signed by Marlene, confirming the opening night selection, the screening schedule, and an invitation to New York for a press event in September. The letter was in my bag at the party. It had been in my bag since the morning I drove to Virginia. I had put it there, not as a weapon, not as insurance. Simply because it was a document that belonged to my life, and my bag was where I kept the documents of my life. There was something else in my bag that night. A photograph. My father had pressed it into my hand in the parking lot when I arrived at the hotel. Before we went inside. Before the crowd and the noise and the tribute video. He had taken it out of his shirt pocket, folded once, and held it out to me without preamble. I unfolded it. It was a photograph of me at 26. Standing in a church basement in front of a projected image from my first documentary, speaking to an audience of 30 people. The image was slightly grainy. The church basement lights were the kind that flatten everything. But my face was clear. My hands were moving. My eyes were on the audience. In the back row, barely visible, slightly out of focus, was a man in a dark jacket sitting alone. My father. He had driven 4 hours to that screening. He had told no one. He had sat in the back of a church basement and watched his daughter speak to 30 people about a film she had made, and then he had driven 4 hours home and said nothing about it for 9 years. I looked at the photograph. Then I looked at him. He said, "I had someone take it for me." I did not want to move to get closer. I did not want you to see me and change. I did not want you to see me and change. 35 years as my father, and that was the most precise thing he had ever said about why he loved me the way he did. From a distance, without altering what he was watching. Bearing witness, without interrupting the truth of what he saw. I folded the photograph carefully, and put it in my bag next to the festival letter. 2 documents. One from the woman who had programmed my film for opening night. One from the man who had driven 4 hours to watch me speak to 30 people and stood in the back so he would not change anything. I carried both of them into that hotel ballroom. I carried both of them to the table near the kitchen where I sat through the tribute video. I carried both of them when my mother stood next to a television camera and called me complicated. I did not reach for either one. Not yet, because timing is everything. Any filmmaker will tell you that. The power of a moment is not just what is in the frame. It is knowing when to hold the shot and when to let it go. I had been holding the shot for a very long time. The evening settled into itself the way these evenings do. The speeches ended, the tribute video was done. The food had been cleared to the edges of the room, and the bar had become the new center of gravity. People moved in the loose, comfortable way of a crowd that has fulfilled its formal obligation and is now simply enjoying being together. My mother was at peak performance. This was her natural habitat. A room full of people who admired her. An occasion built entirely in her honor. A narrative she had complete editorial control over. She moved from cluster to cluster with the ease of someone who had spent 26 years managing the flow of information in real time. She knew when to linger and when to move on. She knew how to make each person feel briefly singular, briefly seen, before transferring that beam of attention to the next person in the room. It was a genuine skill. I'd always acknowledged that. Bree was beside her for most of it. The two of them moved through the room in a formation that had been practiced over decades. My mother setting the direction, Bree filling the space beside her with the right amount of presence. Complementary. Coordinated. A two-anchor desk at a party. I watched from the table near the kitchen. My father had joined me for a while. We ate quietly. He pointed out a colleague of my mother's he had always liked, a cameraman named Gordon, who had worked at the station for 22 years, and had once helped my father carry a piece of furniture into the house after my mother's back went out. Good man, my father said. Always showed up. I noticed he was not talking about anyone at the main tables. Around 8:30, my father's energy visibly lowered. The evening was running long. He was 67 years old and had driven that morning to pick up his sister from the airport and stood at a party for 3 hours. And the left side of his body, the side that had been affected by his stroke 4 years earlier, always tired first. I walked him to the lobby. Sat with him in the chairs near the entrance while he rested. We did not talk much. The quiet between my father and me had always been a comfortable one, the kind built on 35 years of understanding that not everything needed to be said to be fully communicated. He put his hand on my arm before I walked him back inside. Tonight, he said. Stay for the whole thing. I looked at him. He nodded once, the slow, steady nod I had known my whole life, the one that meant he was telling me something important with the minimum number of words he could use. I walked him back to his seat, got him a glass of water, straightened the jacket on the back of his chair. Then I went back to my table. The room had shifted while I was in the lobby. The formal structure of the evening had fully dissolved into something looser, louder. The bar line was longer. Laughter came in bursts from the far corner where a group of camera operators had gathered. My mother was at the center table. She was seated now, surrounded by 4 colleagues, 2 of whom I recognized from the station's evening broadcasts. She had her champagne glass in one hand and the posture of a woman delivering a final monologue she'd been rehearsing for months. I could hear fragments from across the room. 26 years and I never missed a broadcast for illness. Never. Not once. Murmurs of admiration, the clinking of glasses. My mother had built her identity on that record, on the unbroken run, on the consistency that the audience had come to depend on, and that she had come to depend on, and that she had come to depend on. Equally, perhaps more. Bree was beside her, nodding at the right intervals. It was around this point that Jessica, the correspondent from the station, reappeared with her camera operator. They had been circulating for most of the evening, collecting material for the tribute segment. Now, near the end of the night, Jessica was making her final rounds. She stopped at my mother's table. The camera came up. My mother adjusted almost imperceptibly. The trained response, the small lift of the chin, the slight reorientation of the body toward the lens. She had been doing it for 26 years. The body does not forget. Jessica asked my mother what she would miss most. My mother looked directly into the camera with the expression she had worn on the 6 o'clock news for a quarter century. Composed, warm, authoritative, she said, "I will miss the responsibility of it, the trust. When people turn on that broadcast, they are trusting you with the truth of their day. That is not a small thing. That is everything." Nods around the table. Jessica writing. Then my mother looked away from the camera, toward the room. The casual sweep of a woman reviewing what she had built. Her eyes landed on me. Something moved through her face. Not warmth. Recognition. The specific recognition of a problem that has not gone away. She said, to the table, with the camera still running, "You know, every family has its characters." The table smiled. The invitation of that word. Characters. Charming. Inevitable. My mother tilted her head in my direction. That one, she said, always marched to her own drum. Very artistic. We never quite knew what to do with her. Laughter. Easy, social laughter. The laughter of people who did not know me and were simply following Carol Marsh's lead the way they had followed it for 26 years. The camera was still running. The red light was still on. Jessica wrote something on her notepad and smiled at my mother. I sat at my table near the kitchen. I did not move. I did not change my expression. I picked up my water glass and I took a slow sip. There are moments in your life that function like a door closing. You hear the sound. You feel the air shift. And you understand, with a clarity that has no heat in it, that something has just ended. My mother had called me difficult when I was 7, with no witnesses. She had called me complicated at 35, with a camera running. In between those two moments were 28 years of every birthday that was an afterthought, every accomplishment that received a question about the weather, every phone call where my work dissolved mid-sentence into a conversation about Bree's latest broadcast, every Christmas where I watched my mother arrange photographs on the wall and understood that the arrangement was a document, and the document did not include me. 28 years, and a camera. I set my water glass down. I reached into my bag, not for the letter. Not yet. I reached in and felt the folded photograph my father had given me in the parking lot. The one taken in the church basement 9 years ago. The one where he was in the back row, out of focus, watching. I held it in my hand without taking it out. I breathed slowly. In for 4. Out for 6. The technique I had learned a long time ago and never stopped needing, because what I was about to do required the same thing every film I had ever made required. You hold the camera steady, you do not look away, and you wait for the moment when the truth is already in the room, and all you have to do is let it be seen. That moment was approximately 11 minutes away. Marlene Chu arrived at 8:47. I know the time because I was looking at my phone when the ballroom door opened and I saw her come in. I had not been checking messages. I had been using the screen to keep my face occupied, to give my eyes somewhere to rest that was not my mother's table. I looked up at the sound of the door. She was dressed the way she had been dressed every time I had met with her. Linen blazer. Dark slacks. A leather portfolio bag over one shoulder. She had come from the airport. I could tell from the way she was carrying herself, the slight compression of someone who has been sitting in a plane, and then a car, and is not yet fully expanded back into the world. She looked around the room the way people look at rooms they were not expecting to walk into. Then she saw me. She crossed the ballroom without hesitation, the direct line of someone who does not wander in unfamiliar spaces. She pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down and set her portfolio on the table and said, quietly, "I almost did not come. The flight was delayed 40 minutes. I am glad you did," I said. She looked around the room. The chandeliers, the station logo on the foam core board, the clusters of people in party clothes. She said, "Is this a work event?" "Family," I said. She looked at me, then at the room, then back at me, with the expression of someone who has just understood something that changes the entire context. She said only, "Ah." She opened her portfolio, spread the printed documents across the table between us with the brisk efficiency of someone who respects other people's time. The screening schedule, the press materials, a copy of the formal acquisition offer from the streaming platform which had finalized 2 days before. She said, "I want to go through the September timeline while I have you in person. The press event is the 14th. The platform wants you for a promotional interview the week prior." I looked at the documents on the table. Full color, high resolution, the festival letterhead. My name in the header of every page. I said, "Marlene, before we go through the timeline, I need to tell you something about this room." She waited. "This is my mother's retirement party. The woman at the center table, in the blue dress, she is Lena Marsh. She was the evening news anchor here for 26 years. Marlene looked at the center table, at my mother, back at me. She said, "And she does not know about the film. She does not know about any of it," I said. Marlene was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a person who is rapidly and efficiently reassessing a situation. Then she said, "Does she know I am here?" "No." Another pause. Marlene picked up the acquisition offer from the table. She looked at it. She set it back down. She said it, "Lena, may I handle this?" I looked at her. I thought about my father in the back row of the church basement, holding still, not wanting to change what he was watching. I thought about 35 years of holding still. I thought about a camera running while my mother said that one always marched to her own drum. I said, "Yes." Marlene stood. She picked up the portfolio. She straightened her blazer with the single, precise gesture of someone stepping onto a stage they have stood on many times before. She picked up the festival letter and the acquisition offer and held them in one hand, squared at the corners, the way an editor holds pages she has already decided are ready. She walked to the center table. I did not follow her. I sat at my table near the kitchen, and I watched. She approached my mother with the unhurried confidence of a woman who has walked into rooms full of strangers her entire professional life and has long since stopped finding it remarkable. She said, "Excuse me," in a voice that was not loud but carried, the way voices carry in rooms when the person using them knows exactly how much air to put behind each word. The center table turned. My mother looked up. Her anchor face came forward automatically, the composed public expression, the slight smile of someone prepared to be gracious to a stranger. Marlene said, "My name is Marlene Chu. I'm the documentary programming director at the festival. I apologize for interrupting. I wonder if I might have the room's attention for just one moment." The table went quiet first. Then the quiet spread outward the way quiet does in a room where something is happening that has not been scripted. One conversation stopping, then another, then the bar cluster turning, then the camera operator at the far wall lowering his drink. Jessica, the station correspondent, turned. Her camera operator raised his camera. The red light came on, my mother's smile held. But something shifted behind it, a micro-adjustment. The almost imperceptible change of a woman who has spent 26 years reading rooms and has just read something in this one that she does not yet have a category for. Marlene placed the festival letter on the table. She placed the acquisition offer beside it. She said, "I drove here tonight because I wanted to meet your family before the press coverage begins. These things move quickly once they start." She paused. I thought it was important that the people closest to Lena understand what is happening before they read it somewhere else. My mother's eyes went to the documents on the table. She read the festival letterhead. She read the my name in the header. She read the words opening night selection. She read the name of the streaming platform and the acquisition figure beside it, a number that sat on the page with the uncomplicated authority of a fact. The color did not drain from her face slowly. It went all at once. The way a screen goes dark when the power cuts. Marlene continued. Still Here has been selected as the opening night documentary. It has been acquired for international distribution. It has already been screened for legislative staff in 3 states and cited in policy discussions in 2 of them. She paused. It is, in my professional assessment, the most important documentary film made in this country in the past 4 years. Silence. The room held it. Jessica's pen was not moving. She was looking at me across the ballroom. Her camera operator had not lowered the camera. The red light was still on. Bree sat at the center table with her hands in her lap. She did not speak. She did not look at my mother. She looked at the documents on the table, and she looked at them with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has just understood that they have been looking in the wrong direction for a very long time. Marlene turned and looked directly across the room at me. She said, "I assumed your family already knew. I apologize if this is a surprise." She said it without apology. It was the most precise, the most devastating thing she could have said. "I assumed you knew. Stop with me here for just one moment." Because what just happened in a ballroom, a woman standing up in a room full of people and placing the undeniable evidence of your worth on the table in front of the people who denied it, is the moment this entire story has been building toward. If the story reminded you that the truth does not need your permission to exist, it only needs a moment to be seen, drop a camera in the comments. Subscribe if you have not already. The next 15 minutes is where 35 years of patience finally, permanently, irrevocably lands. The room did not erupt. That is the thing about real moments. The ones that actually change something. They do not arrive with noise. They arrive with weight. The kind of weight that presses the air out of a room and leaves everyone standing in something thicker and quieter than what was there before. My mother sat at the center table with 2 documents in front of her, and her champagne glass still in her hand, and the expression of a woman who had spent 26 years controlling the narrative of every room she entered, and had just watched that control leave through a door she did not know was open. Her jaw was set, not trembling, set. The specific tension of a person using the muscles of their face to hold something in that wants very badly to come out. Marlene had stepped back from the table. She did not linger. She had said what she came to say. She walked back across the ballroom toward me with the measured pace of someone who has placed a document on a table and is content to let the document do the rest of the work. She sat down. She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on our table. She said quietly, "I hope that was all right." I said it was exactly right. She nodded, drank her water, opened her portfolio and found the September timeline, and set it between us as if we were in her office and the last 4 minutes had been a brief interruption. But I was watching the room. My mother had not moved. The 4 colleagues at our table had shifted in the uncomfortable way of people present at something they did not agree to witness. 2 of them were looking at their plates. One was checking his phone with the transparent focus of a man who needs to appear occupied. The 4th, Gordon the cameraman, who my father had called a good man, was looking directly at me, not with judgment, not with sympathy, with the honest, uncomplicated look of someone who had just seen something true. Bree had stood up from the center table. She walked toward me slowly, not with the purposeful stride of someone who had decided something, with the uncertain pace of someone who was deciding as they moved. She arrived at my table and stood at the edge of it, hands at her sides, and looked at me with her mother's face arranged into an expression her mother had never used. She said, "I did not know." 2 syllables on each word, evenly weighted. I looked at her. The easy response was there, ready to use. He never asked. Available, accurate, sitting right at the surface. I had been carrying it for 20 years. I did not use it because Bree was not my wound. She had accepted her role in our family system, the way most people accept the systems they are born into, not because she chose them, but because she never had a reason to examine them. She had been handed a position and she had held it, and she had never looked up long enough to see what it cost the person who had been given no position at all. I said, I know. She stood there a moment longer. Then she sat down. Not at the center table. At mine. She did not say anything else. She just sat in the chair 2 seats down and looked at her hands. The camera operator had lowered his camera. He was talking quietly to Jessica. Jessica glanced over at me twice. On the second glance, she held it a beat longer, and I understood that whatever tribute segment she had come to assemble had just been replaced by something else entirely. My mother found me 20 minutes later. The room had thinned. Guests were collecting their things, exchanging final embraces, moving toward the exits in the gradual drift of an evening reaching its natural end. My mother crossed the ballroom with the deliberate stride of a woman who had waited until the audience was small enough that what she was about to say would not have too many witnesses. Old habit. She stopped in front of my table. Her champagne glass was gone. Her hands were at her sides. The anchor composure was still in place, but it was working harder than usual. You could see the effort behind it the way you can see the structure of a building through a thin layer of plaster. She said, "Why would you do this?" Not a question. The same cadence as every verdict she had ever delivered. Swift. Final. Formatted as a conclusion rather than an inquiry. I said, "I did not do anything, Mom." Marlene came because the film matters. "Your timing," she said. Her voice was low and controlled. "Tonight of all nights, you could not let me have this one evening." I looked at her. I said, "You called me complicated on camera." The word landed. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I said, "You did it tonight. You did it last March when you called me artistic to the woman from the station. You did it at Thanksgiving 6 years ago when you told your sister I do my little films." I said each one without heat, without volume, the way you read coordinates, precise, factual, located in time. I said, "I have spent 35 years building a body of work that a senator put in a congressional record, and you have never once asked me what I was working on." Her face changed. Not into remorse, into something more complicated than remorse. Something that sat at the intersection of guilt and grief and the particular anguish of a person who has just heard an accounting they cannot dispute. Her chin moved. The set jaw released, just slightly, and underneath it was something I had never seen on my mother's face in 35 years. Something that looked like the beginning of knowing. She said, "I did not realize." The sentence came out smaller than anything Carol Marsh had ever said on camera. Stripped of production value. No blazer, no lighting, no 6 seconds of controlled eye contact with the lens. Just a woman in a blue dress in a half-empty ballroom saying 3 words that were both true and insufficient, and she knew it. I reached into my bag. I took out the photograph my father had given me in the parking lot, me at 26 in the church basement. The audience of 30. My father in the back row, barely visible, watching. I placed it on the table between us. I said, "He drove 4 hours to that screening and never told anyone." He sat in the back, so he would not change what he was saying. He kept every article in a folder in his bottom drawer for 8 years. He kept every single one. My mother looked at the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the man in the back row. Something moved through her face that I could not fully name and did not try to. It was hers. It belonged to her marriage and her choices, and the 35-year gap between the woman she had decided to be and the one she might have become. It was not something I could fix or interpret or restore. I was not there to restore it. I picked up the photograph, held it for a moment. Then I placed it back on the table. "Keep it," I said. "Show him you found it." She did not respond. But she did not push it away. I picked up my bag. I looked at my mother one last time. The pearls at her throat. The blue dress. The face that had been on television for 26 years and was now, for the first time in as long as I could remember, simply the face of a woman standing in a room without a script. I said, "I hope the retirement is everything you want it to be, Mom." I meant it. Then I walked across the ballroom toward the exit. Behind me, the room was almost empty. Ahead of me, the door to the lobby was open, and beyond the lobby, the night air was warm and thick with the particular silence of a summer evening after something true has been said. My father was waiting in the lobby. He was sitting in the same chair I had walked him to earlier, his cane against the armrest, his hands folded in his lap, watching the door. He had been waiting the whole time. My father did not ask what happened. He stood when he saw me come through the ballroom door, picked up his cane, and fell into step beside me as I walked toward the hotel entrance. His pace was slower on the left side, always, the slight unevenness that had been with him since the stroke. I matched it without thinking. We walked through the lobby and out through the glass doors into the warm night air. His car was in the far row of the parking lot. We walked to it slowly. The cicadas were loud. The parking lot lights threw yellow circles on the asphalt. And his car, he stopped. He turned to me. He said, "Did you leave her the photograph?" I looked at him. He nodded once. The slow, full nod. He said, "Good." That was all. He got in his car, rolled down the window, and looked at me through it for a moment, the way he had looked at me through the dormitory doorway at 18. The same expression. Steady. Undemonstrative. Full of everything that did not need to be said, because it had already been said in every other way, available to him. He drove out of the parking lot. I stood in the yellow circle of the parking lot light and listened to his car until I could not hear it any more. Then I walked to my own car, set my bag on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment in the quiet. The festival letter was still there, the September timeline, Marlene's annotated notes. I did not look at them. I looked at the hotel entrance. The glass doors. The light inside the lobby. Then I started the car and drove to the motel. The following Monday, the station aired the tribute segment on the evening news. I watched it on my laptop in my apartment in Richmond. The segment was 4 minutes long. It opened with the footage of my mother at the anchor desk, the career retrospective, the colleagues speaking warmly. Then it cut to the ballroom. My mother giving her answer about the trust of the audience, gracious, composed. And then, without commentary, without explanation, the segment cut to Marlene, standing at the center table. The editor had made a choice. The full 40 seconds of Marlene's statement ran without interruption. My name. The festival. The opening night selection. The acquisition. I assumed your family already knew. Then the segment ended. No anchor commentary. No follow-up. Just the natural sound of the ballroom and the seconds after Marlene finished speaking, the held silence of a room that has just heard something it did not expect. My phone rang before the segment finished. I did not answer. It rang again. A number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Over the following week, my phone received 11 calls from numbers I did not recognize, 3 emails from journalists, a message through my studio's website from a producer at a national public radio affiliate asking if I would be available for an interview. The festival had released the official programming announcement 2 days after the party. The press had done the rest. I answered the radio interview. I answered 2 of the journalist emails, the ones from publications whose approach I trusted. I did not answer the others. I did not call my mother. She did not call me mother. She did not call me. My father texted on the Wednesday after the party. 4 words. Photograph is on wall. I read it twice. Put my phone face down on my desk. Picked it up and read it again. He had put it on the living room wall. I did not know which wall, which position, what it displaced, or what it hung beside. It did not matter. What mattered was that a photograph of his daughter at 26 in a church basement, speaking to 30 people, was no longer in a parking lot envelope in his shirt pocket. It was on the wall. I texted back. "Which wall?" he replied with a photograph taken on his phone, slightly tilted, the way his phone photographs always were. The living room wall beside the bookshelf. My face at 26 in the frame he had chosen, hung at eye level. Beside it, slightly overlapping the frame at the edge, was the corner of something else. I enlarged the image. It was the festival announcement, printed on regular paper, slightly smudged from an ink cartridge running low. My name at the top, the festival letterhead. He had printed it from his desktop, typed the URL character by character, and hung it on the wall before the ink was fully dry. I set my phone down and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then I went back to work. 3 weeks after the party, I received a letter. Not an email. A letter, handwritten, on plain white paper, in handwriting I did not immediately recognize. It was from Gordon, the cameraman. The one my father had pointed out at the party and called a good man. Always showed up. He had worked at the station for 22 years. He had been in the room for every broadcast my mother ever anchored. He had held the camera that made her look the way she looked for a quarter century. The letter was one paragraph. He wrote that he had watched Still Here the night the streaming platform released it. He wrote that he had watched it again the following morning with his wife. He wrote that his wife had cried and he had not. But it was close. He wrote that he had spent 22 years pointing a camera at things other people decided were worth seeing, and he recognized, watching my film, the specific work of someone who understood that the decision of where to point the camera was the most important decision in the room. He wrote one final sentence. "Your mother is proud of you. She has not found the words yet. But I have known her for 22 years, and I know what she looks like when she is proud of something she does not know how to hold." I folded the letter once and put it in my desk drawer, next to my father's folder, the one with 8 years of clippings. 6 weeks after the party, Bree called. I answered. She did not open with an apology or an explanation or a rewriting of history. She said, "I watched the film last night." She paused. I had to stop it twice. She paused again. "I did not know you could do that." I said, "Do what?" She said, "Make someone feel like they're in the room, like it is happening right now, like you cannot look away." I said, "That is the whole job." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "My daughter Cassidy wants to make a film." She said, "My daughter Cassidy wants to make a film. She has been talking about it for 2 years." And I kept telling her it was not a practical career. I waited. Bree said, "Would you talk to her?" I said, "Tell her to call me. Any time." Another pause. Then, quietly, in a register I had never heard from my sister before, she said, "I am sorry, Lena. I know that is not enough." "But I am." I said, "I know, Inez." The following Tuesday, I drove to the highway. The old gas station I had spotted on the drive home from the party. The boarded-up one on the shoulder of the road. Vines on the roof, weeds splitting the concrete. I pulled over and got out and walked the property in the morning light, with a measuring tape and my phone camera. I measured the walls. I photographed every angle. I noted the roof structure, the window frames, the bones beneath the neglect. The bones were good. They were very good. I stood in the weeds in the early morning light and looked at a building that everyone for 30 years had driven past without a second glance. I thought, this one is worth saving. I got back in my car. I drove to Richmond. I started writing the proposal. By October, the world had rearranged itself. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The way things actually change, which is quietly, in increments, in the small adjustments that accumulate into something you only recognize as transformation when you stop and look back at the distance you have covered. The festival came first. I flew to the screening on a Thursday morning in October. I wore a plain, dark blazer and the same boots I wore on location. I did not buy anything new for the occasion. The film did not need me to be dressed for it. It needed me to be present for it. The theater held 800 people. It was full. I sat in the back, the way my father had sat in the back of the church basement 9 years ago. I watched the audience watch my film. I watched Darlene's face fill the screen, the parking lot light on her skin, the paper bag in her hands, her eyes adjusting to a world she had been kept from for 257 days. I heard the theater go quiet in the way it had gone quiet in every screening room where I had watched people encounter her story for the first time. The specific quiet of 800 people holding their breath at once. When the lights came up, a woman in the fourth row was still sitting with her hands pressed together in her lap and her eyes closed. She was not crying. She was just sitting with it, letting it settle. That is the only response to a film that has ever mattered to me. Not the applause, not the reviews. That woman sitting still with her eyes closed, giving the story the dignity of a moment of silence before she went back to her life. Marlene found me after in the lobby. She said only, "You held the camera steady." I said, "I had a good teacher." She raised an eyebrow. I said, "My father, he taught me to stay in the back of the room." She smiled. The first full smile I had seen from her in 6 weeks of professional conversation. She said, "The platform numbers are in. First 48 hours. She handed me her phone. I looked at the number. I handed it back. I said, "How many of them are women who could not afford $500? She looked at me for a moment. She said, "That is a question worth finding out." We went back inside. 3 months after the party, my mother called. I was at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon in September, going over the gas station proposal, which the county had accepted and which was now in the early stages of permitting. My phone buzzed on the desk beside my coffee cup. "Mom." I let it ring twice. Then I answered. She did not open with an apology. I had not expected one. Carol Marsh did not issue apologies the way other people issued them, as a transaction, a debt paid and cleared. Whatever reckoning she was conducting with herself was internal and slow and would take longer than 3 months. What she said was, "I watched the film. I waited." She said, "The woman at the end, Darlene. When she calls her daughter," she stopped. I held the phone and said nothing. She said, "How long did it take her to answer?" 4 rings, I said. I counted. My mother was quiet for a moment. She said, "You held the camera the whole time." I did. Another pause. Longer. She said, "Your father showed me the folder. The one in his desk." I said, "I know about the folder. I know you know." She said, "He told me." She paused. 8 years. He kept them for 8 years. She said it the way you say something you are still in the process of understanding. The word slightly ahead of the comprehension, the meaning arriving a few seconds behind. I said, "He has always known where to look." My mother made a sound. Not a word. Something smaller than a word. The sound of a person pressing past the boundary of what they have allowed themselves to say for a very long time. She said, "I was not kind to you." The sentence was plain. Undecorated. No performance around it. I said, "No, you were not." I let that sit without softening it. She said, "I do not know if you can forgive that." I said, "I do not know yet either. But I am not carrying it the way I used to. That is the most honest thing I can tell you right now." She said, "That is enough. That is enough. That is more than I deserve." We talked for 11 more minutes. About my father's garden. About Cassidy Bree's daughter, who had called me the week before and talked for an hour about a short film she wanted to make about her school's custodial staff, the people who arrived before everyone and left after everyone, and whose names appeared on no official document. I told her that was a very good subject. She said, "I know. No one ever looks at them." I thought, like father, like daughter, like niece. The thing about the truth is that it finds its way through. Not always on your timeline. Not always in the form you expected. Sometimes it moves slowly through the generations, through the genes, through the instincts, of a 15-year-old girl with a phone camera who cannot yet name what she already knows how to see. My studio took on the gas station project in November. By December, we had the permits. By February, we had the permits. By February, we had the framing. By the following April, on a Saturday morning with thin spring light coming through the new windows, I stood inside a building that everyone had been driving past for 30 years and watched my crew move through the space with the specific purposefulness of people who understand that they are doing something that will outlast them. One of my team members, a 24-year-old named Rosa who had joined us 8 months before, straight out of her preservation program, stopped beside me in the middle of the main room and looked up at the ceiling, which we had stripped back to the original tin. She said, "You can see everything it used to be." I said, "That is the point." She nodded. Went back to work. I stayed in the middle of the room. Above me, the original tin ceiling caught the April light and held it. Outside, cars moved past on the highway without stopping. Inside, something was being saved. There's a shoebox on the shelf above my desk. It has been with me since college. The corners are held with packing tape, and one side is slightly crushed from a move I made at 29. Inside are photographs I took of myself when no one else would. Disposable camera photographs. The yellow Kodak kind. My first apartment. My first editing setup. The day I passed my licensing exam. Every milestone I documented because I understood early that if you do not bear witness to yourself, you disappear. And I had been disappearing for a long time before I decided to stop. I added 2 photographs after October, one from the festival lobby. Me and Marlene, taken by a stranger she asked to hold her phone, neither of us smiling exactly. Both of us looking directly into the camera with the expression of people who have just done something they are satisfied with. One from the gas station. April light through new windows. My crew in the background, Rosa looking up at the ceiling. Me in the foreground, not posing, just standing in the middle of what is being restored. And one more. A small photograph printed on regular paper. Slightly warm in color, the ink not quite dry when it was hung. My father sent it in an envelope with no note. A picture of the living room wall. My face at 26 beside the festival announcement beside, newly added, a photograph Bree had sent him of Cassidy holding her first completed short film on a USB drive, grinning into the camera with the uncomplicated joy of someone who has made something real for the first time. 3 generations on one wall. I put the photograph in the shoebox. I closed the lid. I set it back on the shelf. I learned one thing from a man who drove 4 hours in the rain and sat in the back of a church basement and never said a word about it, that I am not sure I would have learned any other way. That bearing witness is its own form of love. That you do not have to be the loudest person in the room, or the most framed, or the most celebrated, or the most seen. You have to be the one who keeps showing up and keeps the camera steady and trusts that the truth, given enough time and enough light, will eventually be visible to everyone who is willing to look. That is my story. Steady, present, seen. If this story reminded you of someone who kept the receipts for you in silence, share it with them today. Not tomorrow. Today. Drop a comment below with 3 words that describe the person in your life who sat in the back row. And if you are new here, and this is the first story you have heard on this channel, subscribe now, because every story we tell here starts with someone who was told they were not worth seeing and ends with the proof that they always were. I will see you in the next one.